And I'd like to begin today with a recognition that in the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, I want to honor and acknowledge that in Alberta, we live, work, and play on traditional territories of the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. This long relationship includes both experience and knowledge gained and a deep and strong sense of connection to the land, water, and wildlife, including beavers. I am joining you from Edmonton in the Treaty 6 region, and many of you are joining from traditional territories of Treaty 7 and 8 in Alberta potentially, as well as other nations. And for those of you joining outside of Alberta, please take a moment to acknowledge the traditional territories that you are in. So my name is Kerry O'Shaughnessy, and I am a riparian specialist with Cows and Fish, also known as the Alberta Riparian Habitat Management Society. And I'm really excited to have you join us on this virtual tour today. As I'd say, we've heard a lot with these webinars lately. You know, had this been a different time, different situation in our world in terms of you know, the COVID pandemic, we would have been hopefully doing a tour like this in person. But the benefit, I think, is we get to go to a lot more places with virtual. And so we'll see, I hope that you enjoy the places that I take you to today. So this workshop is part of the broader Putting Beavers to Work for Watershed Resiliency and Restoration collaborative between Cows and Fish and the Mastaki Institute, currently funded by the Watershed Restoration and Resiliency Program through Alberta Environment and Parks. And some of the goals of this collaborative are to you know, sort of improve education, awareness, understanding around beavers, the challenges that they pose, but also the benefits that they provide to the landscape, and the idea of, you know, sort of natural infrastructure and green infrastructure, and where can we potentially utilize beavers on the landscape to help with some of the issues that we face at the human level. So it's a combination of research, extension and outreach, and the opportunity for demonstrating different techniques just to see how they're going to work here in Alberta. And there's also an element of looking into policy and seeing what policies or what regulations we might need here in Alberta to help make some of those different approaches to managing and dealing with beaver on our landscape a little more streamlined and perhaps potentially easier to do. So at Cows and Fish, as well as Mastaki, we are sort of a bridge between the science and the practical. And when we get talking about, you know, riparian lands and then all the activities that are happening there, we've sort of over the years developed a process and a pathway to bring the science and the practical together, as well as the people in those different, with different backgrounds, to talk about some of these issues and try and come up with some common solutions. So typically Cows and Fish isn't, you know, involved on the ground in a lot of different riparian projects. But in this case, with the beaver aspect, we've gotten our hands a little bit more involved just because some of it is quite new. And we want to be able to understand the techniques as well as learn with everybody else who's trying them here. So Cows and Fish, we're a not-for-profit organization, and we work with communities and individuals on understanding the way that our landscapes work through a process or a pathway that includes these 5 elements of sort of understanding what the issues are, understanding what the ecological foundations are, who are the people that can help address an issue, what are the different tools that can contribute to you know, either solving an issue or helping you know, people get from one place to another with their goals, which then leads to some action on the ground, and then, you know, actually doing some monitoring to see if these things are working. So we are Cows and Fish, also known as the Alberta Riparian Habitat Management Society, for those who aren't familiar, is a not-for-profit organization working out of Alberta, and with riparian areas as our top of mind and our main vision and main mission. And we work towards that goal with by promoting healthy landscapes and fostering stewardship among those that are out on the land making decisions. So if you're new to a Cows and Fish webinar, you'll hear the word riparian a lot. And basically that is those green zones of water-loving vegetation that are next to a water body. Could be a standing water body like a lake or a wetland. Could be a flowing one like a stream or a river. It could be permanent or could be ephemeral. Maybe it's only, got water in it some of the time. But the soils are influenced by the presence of water, as is the vegetation that you see there. And if you know anything about beavers, you know that they need water and they need the types of vegetation that live by water, like willows, for example, for their habitat. So where we have riparian areas, we have beavers typically. So through the years, as Cows and Fish has been extending and learning and helping people better improve the management of riparian zones, beavers always came up. And so this effort and through the collaborative is a way to sort of build some more tools in the toolbox for adding this piece of the beaver aspect of riparian areas and their management. So beavers are keystone species. So that's meaning they create habitats for other flora and fauna, including ourselves. And in Canada, we have a small affinity, you might say, for them. If you think about our 5-cent coin, or a big affinity for them, because we've got about 709 place names like Beaver Lodge, Beaver Creek, Beaver Dam Creek, and Beaver County that definitely suggest that beavers have played a large role in the way that that Alberta and Canada and North America sort of have developed over the years. So, I mean, let's be honest, it's the lure of beaver pelts that drew Europeans to North America to feed that fashion frenzy for fur hats out of Europe after the virtual elimination of the European beaver species. So as our colleague Lauren Fitch writes, the trade for beaver in the period of about 1534 to 1869 stimulated the exploration and mapping of most of northern North America, irreversibly changed the lives of Native people, contributed to the economic base of early governments, led to the formation of the continent's first multinational corporations, and in a real sense laid the foundations for the development of Canada. So I'd say that's not too bad for a 20-kilogram rodent. So and at that time, when the fur trade was happening, there may not have been the awareness of what beavers did for the landscape in a lot of cases. But we're now beginning to realize that having beavers and their activities within our watersheds has a value for a variety of things. Everything from their contribution to cleaner water to having more water, which can help with fire protection from wildfires, flood and drought mitigation as well, habitats for fish, wildlife, and plants, being speed bumps out there to slow water energy, and as well as a number of other functions that actually benefit watersheds as a whole. And so since those days of the fur trade have ended, beavers have been making somewhat of a comeback, to much of the delight of some who have not perhaps had an issue with beavers and their activity, or have maybe had a longer understanding of their value for the landscape, but also much to the chagrin of others who perhaps have experienced firsthand the challenges that that beavers can pose, to infrastructure, to lands that we want to use for other purposes, as well as our trees and forests, whether they're out, in the wild, if you were, or right in your own backyard. So we've got another poll here for you. We'd like to go a little bit about sort of where you're coming from. If you had one beef with beavers and human conflicts, what would it be? We also have choices for, nothing, would they get along fine? All right, so looks like the majority of you are seeing trees coming down, about the same amount, say there's nothing really issues that you have, you get along just fine. That's excellent. And some people saying that there's too many beavers being removed or missing. and then a range of other issues as well. Okay, great, thanks. That gives me an idea of where you're coming from. So there's no question that living with wildlife in general isn't easy, and beavers make the case that living with them can be sometimes frustrating, can be expensive, can be time consuming, and can be challenging. At other times, you know, they create some really beautiful places and spaces that people can enjoy. So, but we are going to talk about the issues today and explore some of the ways that people are trying to sort of live with beavers in a way that allows us to reduce the stress on their activities, as well as reduce the stress that they put on ours. Because you just never know where they might decide to go next. You know, whether if we keep them where they are or we don't. So there are a number of ways that people have tried to, you know, in quote unquote, deal with beavers. And there's a range of effectiveness, costs, and labor intensity involved, depending on the situation and depending on sort of, you know, what your personal experiences are. So we're going to focus on a couple of the examples, but if you want to dive more into others, the fact sheet that this table is derived from is available on the Cows and Fish website. And there's also an additional booklet called Beavers Are Watershed Partner that, that people can also access to read more about it. And as we go, some of these links will be put into the chat by the folks working behind the scenes. So we're going to touch on deterrence and population management. So that's things like dam removal and lethal removal, as well as then touch on some of the barriers and regulating water levels techniques. So one of the most common strategies of deterring beavers from being where they are and some of the potential issues that they can cause is blowing their dams. And this is an attempt to drain the ponds, reduce the flooding, and sort of remove that problem water off the landscape. The other one is population management. So this is, you know, either shooting the beavers or trapping them in such a way that they could be taken off site and then killed that way. Right now, there's no relocation options in Alberta without special permit. So typically, any population control is essentially removing the beaver from the landscape. So the one issue that this poses is, particularly if you have really good beaver habitat, is that nature abhors a vacuum, right? So as soon as you create that void for habitat, there's the potential for other, you know, a new colony to move in, and they basically have to start. They have to start all over. So what seems like a simple approach in the short term actually can end up being an ongoing effort. Now it is, like I said, one of the most popular ways that people are dealing with beavers, particularly in Alberta. So, you know, trapping and shooting, based on this particular survey, you know, top, you know, 70% of the ways that municipalities and parks are dealing with beavers is through those two methods. Our current regulations and policies also foster beaver dam and animal removal because those activities are exempt from needing regulatory approval through, say, the Water Act or things like that. So there are under certain circumstances. The Fisheries Act, you know, has a beaver dam removal code of practice, for example. So you don't necessarily have to go through the regulatory process to deal with them in this way. I think that's another reason that those two are quite popular. But there's emerging evidence that that there may be some other ways that can actually provide a longer term solution to some of the beaver issues. So this is an example out of Maryland, where trapping was very effective for the first 6 months to a year. That's the gray box. And then, but over time, based on that comment we had before, where new beavers are just going to move in, potentially the issue just returns. But this concept of flow devices that I'm going to touch on, you know, that seemed to resolve the issue a little bit more. It was a bit of longer term, and they were more effective at dealing with that problem. And there's also lots of evidence out there that there is actual cost savings associated with these techniques as well, anywhere from, you know, a third of the budget up to over a 3/4. So what these beaver coexistence tools, that's what we're talking about. So a flow device is an example of a coexistence tool that is designed to prevent problems associated with beaver activity, but provide an alternative to managing beaver conflict, where maybe you don't want to remove the beavers, you want to keep the water because maybe you're a livestock owner and you rely on that beaver pond for water for your livestock, but would prefer that the flooding wasn't as broad. They're designed to be more efficient and cost effective compared to some of the other techniques that we've talked about. They're designed to maintain the beaver and their ponds on the landscape for all the different values that they provide: economic, environmental, social, cultural, all of those things. And some examples we're going to explore on our tour today. So sort of, you know, coexistence in Alberta is not new. It's been going on for quite a while, but it's definitely grown over the last few years as, you know, more and more demonstration sites are popping up, and, you know, we've been trying to find and better understand the way that these tools can work here in Alberta. So I'm curious, I'm going to ask this question now. Have you tried any ways to coexist with beavers? So you have, again, a variety of options. So far, some people have tried things and some of them worked and some didn't. Others have tried things and they've worked for them, so that's excellent. And then there's another portion that haven't really done anything because they didn't know what to do. All right, well, let's go and explore some places. So we're going to start down in the Calgary area, and I'm going to touch first on Fish Creek Provincial Park. Fish Creek Provincial Park is in an area in Calgary, sort of between, if you know the area, Bebo Grove and Marshall Springs. And this area is a provincial park right within the city, and the water in this area is fed by natural springs as well as coming in from stormwater ponds, entering and then eventually enters into Fish Creek. Now, beavers built in to build a dam in this area, and that prompted the Friends of Fish Creek, which is a stewardship group, to try and sort of do something about it. So they recognized the value that the beaver brought to the area, including, you know, creating beautiful wildlife habitat for people to watch and see and sort of bring that park experience. But then they also recognized that they were starting to cause some problems. So this is a low-lying area, and some of the issues were recreational trail flooding and trees falling over the trails, which was essentially inhibiting people from getting from where they wanted to go. So this was, they had freestanding dams. So beavers built a dam near some of these trails and then backed the water up. And there was also a culvert that was being blocked as well, a small one. So some of the partners that were involved in this project were ourselves, Mustachius Institute, the U-Bachelor Environmental, that I believe he is on the call today, as well as Humane Solutions out of BC. And probably the most important people were the Fish Creek volunteers and the communities that actually helped to lead this project. So what did they do? So they for the freestanding dams, they basically decided they wanted to regulate the pond level or regulate that water level. They wanted to keep the beaver there, but reduce the flooding. So this is a schematic of a pond leveler. The idea being that you need to have active beavers to maintain the structural integrity of the dam and secure the pipe. You need to have at least, ideally, 3 feet of water at depth to help keep the intake end submerged, as well as if it's an overwintering pond, so beavers have enough room to move around underwater in the winter. At the outlet end, it's set at the desired height of the pond. So the dam is at a height that is backing water up too much. You can lower that pipe into the dam at a lower level, and then the height that it's set at will then basically, once it reaches here, for example, the pipe will stop flowing. There should be the pipe should extend about 40 feet into the pond. This is so that it pulls any sound of running water that there might be away from the dam, because that's where they're going to be doing most of their building. And then there's an intake protective cage on the end, so that the beavers can't get at the spot where the water is coming into the pipe, because water is flowing this direction. And the mesh size is such that water and debris can still move through, light debris can still move through, but any fair-sized beavers can't get in there with materials. So there's a bit of a schematic of what that might look like in model format. And it's a device that's constructed on land and then floated out into the pond and set into place. So this particular situation used what we call a double-walled pipe. So I'll get to that in a bit, but it's smooth on the inside, corrugated on the outside, with two levels, two layers of the high-density pipe, in order to basically moves a bit more water than a fully corrugated pipe, and it also quiets the sound of running water, because that's actually what attracts beavers to dam, is the sound of running water. So another way to employ some pipes like that is on a culvert. So in this case, this culvert was being plugged, and they needed water to continue to move through this area. So it was a narrow channel. They didn't have enough room to extend that 40 feet. So they basically did a little sort of exclusion fence on that culvert right now, so that the beavers potentially could dam around the fence if they wanted to, but the pipe continues to keep water moving. And then in order to make the corner back here, they essentially didn't connect the pipes and just put one into one end of the fence and the other into the other. This is also a technique that can be used when you have a shallow system, and because then there's not just one intake end on the pipe. There's two, and they're all protected. So thanks to Friends of Fish Creek and Katie and the group there for sharing these photos with us. But this is just a bit of an example of how both of these techniques sort of relieve their trail flooding issue. So Friends of Fish Creek is also big on stewardship and education and outreach. So they also have put in different educational signs along the trails as well, to help people understand what these techniques are and why they're there. So some of the goals that they learned, or their lessons that they learned, was that as a stewardship group, many hands make light work, and it was an opportunity for them to get together and apply some different techniques. They could be creative and adaptive, learning from the expertise of outside professionals like Humane Solutions and UBECHLA Environmental, and monitoring and maintaining was very important as well. They couldn't just walk away. They had to check on it now and then. And if the beavers started to build a dam downstream for some reason, then they could take care of that little dam so that the pond leveler could remain functional. And then just to keep trying new things. So one of the things that they did try was looking at the tree, looking at the element of trees coming down and tree felling. So obviously very common technique with beaver. They use it for food. They use it for dam building material. They add that material to their lodges, and they can take down a lot of trees in a very short period of time. So they were already using some of the common methods like wiring and wrapping trees, and they've been giving the tree a wide berth, using a tall mesh, at least a meter high, The beaver can't crawl under because they're anchored into the ground a bit with the pokey ends of the wire, I would think. And then if it snows, you know, they've got a pretty tall height that they would have to climb in order to chew that tree. Some of the issues with tree wrapping is we use too fine of a mesh or wrap the trees too tight. And so we encourage that if you're going to do tree wrapping, you know, the tips would be use a stiff wire, go at least that meter high, and provide room for that tree to grow. And these are another example of a barrier for having beavers on the landscape, but then they can't get at the trees. So another technique that's been talked about over the years is this idea of you know, painting the trees and doing some sand painting. Basically, you mix sand with paint the tree, and it creates a grit that is not super palatable for the beavers. So this was tried in Fish Creek as well, and although it was effective at reducing the number of stumps that were chewed, when questioned about the impact it would have on the beaver if the paint was ingested, and we found that there was actually no research or science really to say that the paint was safe for beaver and not really toxic to them. So despite being used in a whole bunch of other jurisdictions, that science just really wasn't there. So upon further review of the ingredients in some of the paints that are out there, particularly the paint that was used here, along with other adhesives and that are available, it was basically determined that the risk of toxic effect to beaver was too high to recommend this technique or management anymore. So I just wanted to bring that up because you may have heard us talk about it in the past, but we're currently not recommending it. So the next stop is also in the city of Calgary, over in Griffith's Woods. This is one of the very first coexistence projects that the collaborative was involved with, and it involved, again, a pond leveler on a bridge that was being blocked by a beaver, as well as an exclusion fence on the culvert, and continuing with the tree wrapping. So let's head north a bit. There's other parks doing this type of work as well. So Pigeon Lake is an example. Again, trail flooding, sort of threatening a bridge, a recreational bridge for trails. So the pond leveler downstream, the bridge is up here. You can see my mouse. And this pond leveler is downstream, cage and intake end on this end, flowing downstream and out through the dam. And this is just a few years ago, and has been protecting that bridge, as well as maintaining the beaver habitat, which is important for these parks and these watersheds. Let's head a little bit further to the northeast to the Cooking Lake Blackfoot Provincial Recreation Area. This is just east of Edmonton and a little bit south of Elk Island Park. And in 2021, they embarked on an initiative to, again, they've got lots of beaver in this area. It's knob and kettle terrain, lots of wetlands, lots of you know, historic beaver in a fairly settled landscape otherwise. And so combinations of pond levelers, exclusion fence and pipe combinations, like you see down here, as well as some exclusion fencing, are some of the techniques that were sort of tried there. And they've actually done this before. Earlier in early 2000, or about 2011 or so, they did employ another 12 devices in the park in different areas than the ones I just showed you. And over the years, the cost of the park management expenses before putting in those pond levelers and the management of the levelers once they were in was quite, you know, a lot less. And so there's an economic value there for the park to invest some time and effort in training their staff and implementing these things. And then, you know, just seeing how they work over time. And some of those costs have been summarized as well in a fact sheet that is a cost benefit fact sheet that again shows the difference between the other management types like dam removal, lethal trapping and shooting, bounty hunting, other ways of dealing with beaver. And their friends to the north in the national park, same thing. They estimated, about a 50% reduction in the cost related to how they were doing things before to how they're doing things now with some of these pond levelers. Now they don't have pond levelers everywhere. There's still some of these other activities going on in both these locations, and I think that's important to remember that these new techniques are just a suite in the toolbox. There may be places where having beaver on the landscape is not an option. In these cases, there are some other reasons for keeping beaver there. So from there, let's go a little bit northwest, and let's visit a municipality who was one of the first to jump on board with demonstration opportunities back in 2017. This is Laksanan County. And this is an example where there was an issue of a plugged culvert flooding upstream, affecting some residences upstream, and great little roadbed that created the perfect dam with a hole in it. That culvert is literally in a roadbed is literally a dam with a hole in it. And the channel here was just wide enough for an exclusion fence. So through a workshop in 2017, again, part of the extension and awareness of these tools, a group got together to install a culvert protector. So basically keeping the culvert clean and clear, but still allowing, again, the beaver to exist in this area. Now the beaver could potentially still dam on this particular situation, and I'll get to that in a minute. You'll see this grate down here on the bottom. That was kind of the standard practice. Put a grate on the front of the culvert, come by, once, however often, several times a year, remove the grate, shake it out, dig out the dam, and repeat. So in this case, these structures aren't completely maintenance free or adjustment free. So a couple years later, after this had been installed, beavers sort of figured it out. And what we learned from this is that there wasn't enough space around, particularly on this side. The fence needed to be bigger. So the adjustment there was to add a pipe. So this became a combo device, fence and pipe culvert exclusion. So now the beavers can dam around this fence all they want, but water will still continue to move through that pipe. And it's worked fairly well. It's kept the water levels at a reasonable level for the last couple of years. Oh, and the other thing is, we did remove the grate when we put in this pipe, and there was also an undersized culvert cone within that culvert. That actually made the sound of running water about the magnitude quieter, and so that trigger would have been less as well. That sound of running water would have been less with those devices removed. So the concept of a culvert fence is based on this idea of Keystone. It's called a Keystone fence. Basically, what it does is it's a trapezoidal shape that makes the length much longer that the beaver has to dam, moves the sound of running water away from the culvert, right? Because it's quite a far distance at the back end there, and then widens the area that water has to flow. So that also reduces noise and movement. So when you've got lots of room to try this technique, it's when you want to keep the culvert clear, again, maybe able to withstand some beaver activity, but you've got enough room to build it large enough to make it effective on its own. And if you don't have that room, then you can do a smaller fence with a pipe as an option. So what has the county and other municipalities learned from this? Basically, again, they're learning from their own experiences. Being first of anything is never easy, or even at the beginning of something is never easy. So they need to be creative, adaptive to situations to try and achieve the goals. They learned that bigger is better when it comes to the exclusion fence. And again, monitoring and maintaining these things, you got to check on them at least a couple times a year so that you can get ahead of some of maybe some unforeseen circumstances that you might see. And the more you do it, the more you learn, and inviting others to learn from their experiences. They're open to people visiting these sites. They do workshops and tours as well. And they haven't had to go back to this site as often as they used to. So I think that's the take home for that one. They also did a pond leveler in a freestanding dam downstream of a bridge. And this again was one of the first in the province. And this was a deep situation. So there was boats and canoes and ropes on bridges involved. They don't all have to be this complicated, but when you got a lot of hands, you can do things kind of creatively. But it's been in place again for about 4 years, and the dam did blow out to the right here a couple of years ago, but the beavers just rebuilt it back up, and the pond leveler stayed in place. So there are several other municipalities that are trying these coexistence tools. So if you're in any of these areas, you can touch base with often it's the Ag Services Department, or just check in with the office and see where you might be able to go out and check one out. And I may have missed some on the list, but these are the ones that I could think of. So as we've said, these things aren't completely maintenance free. This was an example where the pond leveler was put in. It was in a beaver complex, so pond after pond after pond, and the beaver ended up coming up from underneath. From below, there was a fairly small gap between the outlet and the next pond, and they started to plug it up that way. So just adding a panel on the front of it at the outlet end, and then covering it up. Again, beavers can dam up around all they want. They won't be able to block it off. So this is an example of the single wall versus double wall pipe. Single wall can be used, but again, the sound of water is louder. So having a single wall pipe completely submerged is recommended if you're going to use it, so that it's totally underwater. And the double walled pipe is a thicker pipe, a little bit heavier, not quite as flexible, but does seem to withstand our freeze thaw conditions that we have here, as well as sort of create that quieter sound for water. So just some other tips for anybody considering some of these things, and these are from sort of what people have told us, but also from some experience that we've gained. It's good to drop the water no more than 1.5 foot to 1.5 feet at one time, because that's an amount that the beaver can sort of adjust to without feeling like their habitat is basically being destroyed. If you do need to drop water a lot, then it might be beneficial to trap out the beavers first that are used to that pond, and then wait for new beavers to move in, because the new ones may not be adjusted to they won't know what the conditions were like before, and they might be just fine with the new level. This is a summertime endeavor, particularly if you're going to be in the water. It's nice to do it when it's warm, and you don't want to be too late into once beavers have started food caching for winter. You don't want to be changing water levels too much at that point. And some of the potential consequences of dropping water too much too fast can be that the beaver will move downstream. They'll decide that this dam is no longer worth maintaining, and so they'll move somewhere else where they can control the water a little bit better. And if they happen to go just a little bit downstream, they might end up backing water into your pond leveler, which then renders it ineffective. And the other option, I guess, is that they could just go somewhere else entirely, which causes the dam to fail. And again, no need for that leveler anymore. So we're headed back south now. We're on our way to just back a little bit west of Calgary. This is just another example of how you might put a barrier on a culvert. This is a T culvert, one of the first ones done when this road was being replaced. There's a vertical piece on the end of this with holes and grates in it that allows water to move. But again, beaver aren't able to dam the bottom and nor get up on top. And they've done some economic analysis there as well, and recognized that they've saved a few bucks with this investment as well. So landowners are also getting involved. There's other ways of directing beaver where you want them to go. Things like putting out the buffet, moving aspen, which is one of their prime foods. That sort of says easy money. Here's some easy food. Don't take my trees. It's labor intensive, but if you've got the time and the effort, want to put the effort, that is one way to sort of direct the beaver where they want to go, as well as using audio cues, potentially putting out a tape recorder, cheap one that they can then bury because of the sound of water, and again in a spot where you want them to be. This is one that is still pretty in its infancy, I think, here in Alberta, but definitely looking for opportunities to try that. And landowners are getting involved, with farmer ingenuity and trying to deal with, work with materials that they have. A little bit of a weeping tile pipe here. This person said it worked for them. This is a temporary fix for them. Another short one with PVC. This one was an attempt at using a different pipe style. We don't recommend that big green heavy pipe. It's too heavy and it doesn't flex very well. And these shorter ones worked temporarily, but the beavers ended up burying it. So that sort of added validity to the idea of having that 40-foot length. So there are some regulatory considerations here in Alberta for pond levelers, culverts, and other in-stream activities. And so these sort of have been more of the forefront lately in the last few years, but some flow devices may require regulatory approval. So it could be through the Provincial Water Act, the Provincial Public Lands Act, like temporary field authorizations, maybe Department of License of Occupations, depending. And then for fish-bearing water bodies, the Fisheries Act comes into play as well. So particularly for fish-bearing streams, the processes are a little bit different and can be a bit cumbersome right now. But it does kind of vary still from place to place. So we always recommend that you check with your local regulators and authorities before doing any installation, and give yourself enough time for the approvals process before going through the installation. So one of the things through the collaborative, is trying to streamline some of these processes for an activity that is intended to be beneficial, right? Keep the beavers and their benefits, but just mitigate some of the other issues. So that continues to be worked on. So this next stop is up sort of west of Red Deer-ish. And we're going to bring in Erin now from Alberta Conservation Association to tell us about her project.
Thank you very much, Kerry. So I will take over screen share here. So as Kerry mentioned, my name is Erin Vandermeer, and I work for the Alberta Conservation Association, and I will just present our portion of the tour for the Beaver Pond Leveler and Culvert Exclusion combo project that we did on our Porter Conservation Site. So as a, whoops, sorry about that. Quick little who is ACA. So we are formed in 1997. We're a non-for-profit land trust that works throughout Alberta. And our vision is an Alberta with an abundance of diversity of wildlife, fish, and their habitats, where future generations continue to use, enjoy, value our rich outdoor heritage. And our mission is to conserve, protect, and enhance fish and wildlife populations and their habitats for Albertans to enjoy, value, and use. So if you haven't heard of Alberta Conservation Association, please go check out our website. And we, as a land trust, do own land. So there's a lot of sites to go visit for day use, whether you hunt, fish, just want to go hike around, berry pick, familiarize yourself with them. So as a land trust, we can, of course, own that land. And we purchased the Porter Conservation Site in 2018. So it's located just east of Caroline, west of Red Deer, just off Highway 54. And it is 153 acres with just under 2 kilometers of the Raven River flowing through it. And a bonus for us was this lovely beaver pond that existed in the northwest corner of the site. So it was there, the beaver were happy. The biggest concern was with water flowing through this little unnamed stream from the west, and then which was creating the pond, but also as the dam became higher and higher, which kind of scooches around here, the concern was flooding out of this range road, and the county was often concerned and had previously done some beaver management. And although ACA does beaver manage a variety of different tools throughout the province, this was a site that we wanted to try and keep them on the property and see the benefits for the landscape. So as we secured the property in 2018 and decided to kind of take action right away on the current concern with the beaver flooding out the range road, because it was already quite high, the pond. So we partnered with the Medicine River Wildlife Center as, let's call this attempt one. They had some funding to install some pond levelers, so we decided to work with them, and they provided materials and we provided manpower. It was a perfect deal. They, instead of using that double walled pipe that Kerry was talking about, instead we opted for 3 12-inch weeping tile pipes. So a little bit more flexible. They were a little cheaper on the end just based on budget. And we decided to give them a go. They were tied together. We had that cage, as you can see in the bottom right there, bottom left, sorry, into the pond. And then the pipes, we dug that trench into the dam and laid the pipes in to kind of get that level that we wanted. We wanted to reduce it by about a foot. As you can see, we had not done this before, and they were kind of learning in the process as well. We hung those pipes over the dam, and then they provide that outflow into further down the stream that actually flows to the Raven River. So that was our install day. And following up kind of further down the road that summer, we noticed there was that 1 foot, kind of 1.5 feet lowered water level in the pond, which is what we were going for. And then again, further in September, you could still see that lowered water level, which was great going into the winter, that the beaver had been able to adjust to that water level. And then we could anticipate a potential spring runoff that could fill the pond up a little bit. And you can see the pipes have been covered at this point, kind of made camouflage back into the landscape with the beavers. So that's kind of the hope that they get accustomed to them being there and then can move on to other activities. There was definitely some lessons learned from this one. So first of all, beaver can chew through the thinner weeping tiles. They are not smooth on the inside. They are corrugated, creating that louder sound, as Kerry had mentioned. And so the beaver just chewed through at least one. We're not sure, maybe more. We do know that they didn't chew through all 3. So maybe there was the bonus of having 3 pipes instead of just the single. In this case, if you're not going to use that smooth double-walled pipe, because as the season continued, there was still always flow while the water levels were high enough. So we assumed that one stayed open. However, as you can see, they just chewed through it and then plugged it up with mud, as you can see here on this side on the right. And because those pipes were laying all the way over the dam and then kind of right at the base of the dam, they were actually able just to plug it up, as you can see in the bottom left. So realistically, even though there was still some water flowing, they plugged it, chewed it, wasn't really ideal. We did some repairs that year and actually extended the pipes even further to be buried underneath the water of that outflow side, and then pin them down with rebar and wrap them with wire. So there was a little bit of quick fixes there that seemed to work for the time being, but we knew that this was not kind of the long-term solution in the end, which we had wanted to really keep the beaver on the landscape. So the following spring, we're not quite sure if the county ended up trapping the beaver just because of whatever situation. There was also a different outflow to the south of the pond, but these kind of dried up. So I mean, the pond itself wasn't high enough. These aren't plugged. We're not sure if the beaver ended up chewing through the rest, but the outflow as well dried up. So the water levels were just too low. And we were okay with that. We kind of wanted them to be there because we wanted to use these coexisting tools as a demonstration site and just see how they would really work. But it was also kind of, we just let it be and watched it through the summer. And then again in 2020, not too many big changes there at that time. But then in 2021, much to our excitement, the beaver were back. I'm sure not everyone would say that, but we were quite pleased to have them so we can keep using these tools and see how we can keep them on the site. As you can see, it's quite a complex. So this was taken with the drone footage. The red star here is that original pond leveler, and these are all these little outflows of the stream, or of the pond, sorry. Here was, in all these yellow lines here are additional dams that these beaver just kind of, they were very busy in 2021 to keep that water in there. We did end up doing a bit more permitting this time around. We contacted DFO and we reviewed their interim code of practice for the beaver dam removal. It's just kind of in the works right now. And through that, because of this unnamed stream that did eventually flow into the Raven River, which has some fish species, we did end up putting a request for review in with them with no more documents needed. They were happy with that and saw that there was no harm done to any fish habitat, fish species for that. And then we also did apply for a temporary field authorization with Alberta Environment and Parks for that work that was being done within the bed and shore. It kind of disappears, the bed and shore, when you have a pond being created, but we did apply for that with no concerns, and we will probably renew that permit, the authorization, as these structures are kind of more permanent in the bed and shore. And then we did contact the Water Act as well with no concerns, so we could go ahead with our attempt two, I'll call it, for the Beaver Pond. So we had a training day with Cows and Fish and Humane Solutions to really get a hands-on experience as to how to do this, kind of hopefully for the last time-ish at the pond. So we did do another pond leveler within the pond. We decided to actually, instead of trying to remove those old weeping tile pipes and the whole system that was installed 2018, we actually just dug a trench right beside it in the dam. That same main dam we decided was kind of the main focus there, and lowered it again to that water level that we wanted the pond to be at. And then the cage went right beside the other cage. It was kind of the deepest part of the pond. And in this case, we have that double walled this time. So that's smooth inside, the corrugated outside. And we actually, in the bottom left, you can see kind of within these sticks, we kept that pipe flush with the dam. So we didn't extend it beyond this time. So the beaver couldn't really come up and plug that. And then, so once the pipe was laid, culvert was in, or the cage, sorry, was in, we covered up the dam, the pipe again in the dam, and just kind of let it be for that install. The other portion of the project is that culvert on the west side of that range road. So as Kerry also showed, these were kind of the approaches, these great like things, stand up in front of the culvert and then clean them out every once in a while. This was what it looked like at one point in the spring, and we wanted to ensure that it was more like less maintenance of an annual thing, and then just opening that up so that the water could freely flow rather than backing up into the neighboring land, which also happened to be a crop field. And that is here at that red star up here is where we did this culvert exclusion combo with the pond leveler, as Kerry had also mentioned in a few scenarios. So even though there were no dams here at the time of install, we just decided that in case the beaver decide to focus their efforts here 1 year, we were ready for that higher water level. And especially in the spring runoff, if that happened, they couldn't really dam as much along the outside of this culvert, but that water would constantly flow no matter what. So those were the two projects, the pond leveler and the main dam, and then this culvert pond leveler combo on the other side of that range road by the culvert. So after we installed the pond leveler, we put up a trail camera just to see what might happen, which was actually really fun. As you can see, so the install was August 10th, I believe, and here we have this little beaver going up and down over that dam, carrying his muck, trying to do his thing. And then again on the 13th that morning, he's going across, or she, I guess, trying to plug that other end, thankfully without success. We can also see that lowered water level here in the background by that 1 foot, 1.5 feet that we were aiming for just to get that water level down. And then it's always great to see other wildlife using our sites, especially dams, just going around. There's actually quite a few photos of this moose browsing in the background, which was really neat to see. So a revisit a couple of weeks later, again, that water level is down. You can see that in the pond, which is great. And then this has kind of become more into the landscape with the beaver doing its thing, which is always, it doesn't make it so raw and fresh in the landscape having these pipes. And then we did end up caging it, the outflow, just a little bit to really prevent the beaver being able to get up in there and plug it. And it is hard to see, but the water is still flowing through that outflow in the pond leveler. And then again, this is the downstream side of the culvert, but you can see that water change there. And then again, that same culvert exclusion here with the pond leveler. The beaver hadn't touched that side. They're not as active on the upstream side of the range road, but just to be sure, and we'll just keep monitoring that as the years go on. So next steps will be to head out again this spring, hopefully probably in the next month or so, to clear any debris that might have just come down the winter, make sure everything is good for the spring runoff and melt. And then we'll continue monitoring it as the summer and as the years progress. And hopefully the beaver can stay with us on our conservation site. So here's just another picture with some ducks enjoying our pond. It's always nice to see the different animals. And thank you for being here today and watching presentation. I do have one more quick little video that Kerry created that I will share now about our project.
Hi, this is Kerry with Cows and Fish, and I'm sitting out along this beautiful beaver pond in central West Alberta. This is a location where beavers are really active in a wildlife area, and their ponding has been so great that it was causing some problems for the road upstream. So in 2021, Cows and Fish, the Alberta Conservation Association, and Humane Solutions got together to put in a flow device that would manage the pond level, lower it some so that the beavers could still maintain their home here, but the issue along the road will hopefully be less over the coming years.
And there you go. I will pass it back to you, Kerry.
Thanks, Erin. That was very informative, and I'm glad to see all those different wildlife species using that Keystone pond. So that's awesome. Okay. Just before we open it up for questions, I just want to just do a quick little wrap up here. A lot of sort of the background information that that led to a lot of these projects, as well as more information about the benefits and values that beavers provide, are available on the Beaver Collaborative website, which is rockies.ca. /beavers. There's a couple of training videos or videos about installing the Laksanan County efforts. And again, just as examples of how these things might be done. I think I saw Noreen had put up a fact sheet link about beavers and fish. And there's also some other, the cost benefit analysis fact sheet is there, as well as the Beaver, our watershed partner booklet. And all these resources are available online, and some of them are also available in print if you're interested in that. If you want to learn more, you can check out the Cows and Fish website, or that rockies.ca as well. There's a beaver mailing list if you want to get on it to find out what's new and improved going on around beavers. So you can either email ourselves or Holly at Mustaki directly. And if you want to go check out more and do an extended tour, there's a map of beaver coexistence tools on, again, that rockies.ca website, where you can zoom in to these different locations, see some photos of a particular project. These ones happen to be in Elk Island National Park. It tells you a little bit about the project, why they did what they did, and shows some photos. So if you want to go on a broader tour, that resource is there as well. And lastly, I guess just to sum up, beaver coexistence requires a tolerance for their activities. So riparian systems, as well as beaver activity, it's dynamic and always changing, but riparian areas are resilient and evolved with that kind of activity. So they've got a long history of contributing to all the different ecological functions, and those are some they're so adaptable that makes them kind of special. But we just need to give not only the riparian zones, but the beavers as well, the time and the space to help us by doing some of the things that they do. And hopefully we can implement some different tools to allow them to do those activities, but also mitigate some of the issues that or the conflicts that they cause when we often encroach on their space. So trying to find a happy medium there. So with that, we're not necessarily going to leave it all to beaver, but definitely I think they play an important role, and I hope that you guys took away something from today as well. So with that, I think we will we'll open it up for questions. We won't put that poll up quite yet. We'll do the questions first. And if you want to get a hold of myself or anybody at Cows and Fish, you can check out our website, as well as my contact information is there as well. So thanks to our members and supporters that allow us to bring these events and everything that we do to people of Alberta and wherever you're coming from. So thank you for being here. So let's do some questions, Noreen, I guess.
Great, thanks, Kerry. That was awesome. I haven't seen some of those places myself recently, only maybe before when it worked perfectly and you installed it, and then some of the things you got to learn as you go along. So it's good to see those updates myself too. So we have a few questions, and I just will encourage the audience to please put your chat questions into the Q&A, because we can't actually move them ourselves. So if you do have something that's more of a question, feel free to add it to the question and answer section. And I'm going to start by, it's kind of more of a comment, but I think is a good comment to just follow up on. One of the things you talked about was the sand paint technique, and why we're no longer recommending it. And John Burley asked, should we, basically should we, or his comment was, be exploring alternative non-toxic adherents of some kind mixed with sand, or, maybe we just need to think about coating saplings with sandy, muddy muck. So can you comment on that a bit more, Kerry, if you're able?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely opportunities to try different things. I think the challenge with with the paint in particular is that even though sort of what some of that that review found was that even though the paints say they're non-toxic, the type of materials that are within them may pose a threat to the animal's health. So I think the key thing, if you're going to try anything like that, is to ensure that, you know, the non-toxicity is true, and that it really is, there's nothing in there that could potentially harm them, because we really just don't know. I do think there's opportunity for further literature review and potential research to find out, you know, what is, even though we inquired with a lot of different jurisdictions that are using it and have had success, that animal health piece just seemed to be a missing one. So I would say definitely there's opportunity to try different things, but just make sure that what you're really trying is an actual non-toxic substance.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. And I will add to that, that in the work that Saki led, because they led the research review piece for us on that, is that they couldn't find anything at that time on other adhesive type things, because nobody's tested them on beavers, and mostly not on rodents at all. And, you know, a little bit of research out there on things that could be sticky or whatever is rodent tested, but mostly very little of that. And so yeah, I think that it'd be great to have some academic involvement and actually to find out what's, you know, humane and safe from that perspective, which doesn't seem to be out there at this point. So so the next question is Kurt from Kirby, and he is wondering if you could explain more about how burying the speaker works, as in the sound of running water, and, you know, would it last long enough for a beaver to respond and build where you want them, or not build where you don't want them?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that we sort of learned about from the Gatineau Park example in Quebec. And it's my understanding that the tape recorder itself isn't buried until the beaver hears the running water, and then they bury it. So you basically take your tape recorder out there, place it where you think you'd like to attract them to, and let them find it. So like I said, we're looking for opportunities to test this here in Alberta and just see what does it take. And even with some of the inquiries that I've made with some other, you know, people around North America, definitely not a lot of people know exactly what the tips and tricks are for making it work. So I think it'll be a pioneering experience to test it out.
Yeah, and I know that Pierre Bolduc, who's one of the landowners we've worked with outside of Calgary, has tried it, and for sure they buried the sound so that they got what they wanted, as in the beavers did the burying, not
yeah,
Pierre.
yeah, he didn't. Yeah, he set it out there, and then
That's right.
the beavers buried it. So yeah, so there's definitely a loss of investment probably going to happen on that one. So you'd want to you know, invest wisely.
Put a long string or rope attached to it so you could find it again,
you could
maybe.
Pull it out, maybe.
Or something, or a tracking device.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, good question.
So, yeah, so I mean, this is where it's trying to outsmart a rodent that you think would be easy, but they're pretty wily and they're persistent. So that's why we need to be creative in our solutions. So the next question is kind of, we're talking about the urban use of these techniques, particularly the cages and the culverts. So when you're adding them in a park landscape, it can potentially be considered an eyesore from park users. Can you comment on any of the feedback, negative feedback in particular, that might have been received about the look of the projects that might detract from the kind of natural look, and or some of the techniques that we know have been being used at some of the sites to make them more appealing visually?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great comment, and there may be somebody else in the group that could speak to that a little more. But I know that the idea is that they're going to be, the pipe and the cage are going to be completely submerged. So half the time, passersby aren't even going to know that they're there, and particularly when you know, once you know, as Aaron said, the installation isn't so raw. You know, it will have been built into the dam. Everything will just kind of be happening as it's happening. From the culvert exclusion perspective, you may have noticed on a lot of the culverts, they have a wood border around the top. So that actually, and I can show up a picture of that again, if you're not quite sure what I'm remembering or referring to, but that not only helps with the structural integrity of the structure, but also makes it safer because there's no pokey ends, right? It's got a nice wood header, and also makes it look a little more aesthetically pleasing. So from the most part, once people kind of understand what's happening and why it's there, and see that it's, the trail isn't flooding anymore, or for whatever reason, then they seem to be fairly accepting of it. But if somebody wanted to put a comment in the chat to expand on that, that would be welcome.
Yeah, and obviously every situation is certainly different.
Yeah, it really comes down to what a person's personal tolerance is for them, right? And do they understand, again, why the purpose of it being there? So that's why signage, interpretive walks and tours and opportunities for people to learn can help build that understanding.
Right, and that's a good point. And some of the sites we have been involved in have explicitly included signage, interpretive signage, to help people understand that, because that as opposed to just seeing something that might be, seem foreign or unsightly, then there's an explanation and understanding that it's a park. So you're trying to coexist with nature, which most parks are, especially provincial parks or national parks. That's generally their mandate. So another question. Before I answer it, I'll just let the audience know that there's been some requests to share the links we've been putting in the chat, and we certainly can send out basically a list of all the links that we've shared, basically as a follow-up email to all registrants. So I think we can totally do that. So just so people know. And the next question is more on fish focused. And so John Burley has asked, are there any issues with fish habitat connectivity in regard to these structures? So maybe Kerry, you can comment, and certainly Erin, if you want to add to whatever Kerry says, that'd be great.
Yeah, there's the Beaver Dam and Fish question is one that that pops up quite a lot. And beavers and fish evolved and grew up together, at least our native species did. So they're sometimes throughout the year, throughout different years when water levels are up or down, the ability of fish to travel from below or above a dam can change. But generally, there's always water moving somewhere through that dam, and they can always wiggle their way up through some of those spaces. There is some example, or I'm not even sure if it's examples or just conversation, that maybe some of our native or non-native fish might be having some sort of a difficulty navigating from upstream or downstream when beaver dams are present. But again, the pipe is designed in such a way that the mesh is big enough that fish of a fairly large size can get through. The size of mesh that is being used in Alberta is the same size that they use for salmon in BC. So from that perspective, they should be able to get in and around. If the way that there's a notch cut out on the pipe on the inlet side that again reduces suction. So again, fish aren't necessarily going to be attracted to that spot. And then, yeah, as long as there's water on both sides of the dam, particularly our native fish should be able to get up and down. Erin, do you have anything to add?
I was going to mention that native versus non-native, and we've had that discussion internally within the organization. And we do have some projects where different management does occur, especially around spawning time, and maybe we focus just before spawning time and then we leave the beaver, let them do their thing, but kind of do this seasonal management that's a little different. But this native versus non-native, I also know that we were talking about those fish ladders that they can build sometimes along the dam, again, depending on the fish species. But you covered it, okay.
Thanks, Erin, that's good.
Yeah, and one of the kind of follow-up comments was about, actually the design specs, so to speak, that allow that passage. So that was great. You covered that, Kerry. And I think, most of the research in the US in particular, where they're actually using beaver dams and beaver dam sort of mimicry to actually restore fish habitat, because that is part of actually what, as Kerry said, they evolved with. So they might be temporary barriers, but they're generally, it's about a space and time situation, not an absolute. And they actually do and did live together very harmoniously. It just sometimes seems a problem in a short term or short spaced look at things when we're short of fish for other reasons too, right? So not due to beavers. So another question for you guys is this person, I'm not sure how to say, Chira Stella, would like to know what you would suggest to lower or how or if you could lower the water level 3 feet or more. In this case, the beaver left, and they're curious to see how they can do it better next time. So if I'm understanding, maybe they lowered it a bit too much, but they felt they needed to at the time. So some suggestions on how to implement and maybe not have that the beaver leave, or other ways of approaching it next time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something that that I learned as well, that if you drop the water more than 1 foot to 1.5 feet at a time, the beaver cannot recover, basically. Like it's not that they can't recover, it's just that it's too much of a shock for them. And so they will either leave the area, or they will go and try and start a dam somewhere else. So my best suggestion there is patience, if you can have it, and actually lower it incrementally. So lower it 1 foot, either 1 year or early in the season. Let them get accustomed to it. Let them patch up the dam. Let them realize that this dam is still important to them. And then you can go in afterwards and potentially dig it out from the bottom, the dam, the outlet end, and lower it another 1.5 feet or another foot. So it might take you 2 steps to get to that 3 foot mark, if you have the time and the resources to do that. If you but the counsel that I've received just through some mentorship is that if you really want to drop it more than that 1.5 feet right away, then the best thing to do is well, not the best thing, but one of the approaches would be to actually remove those beavers, like take them out, and then let a new colony come in and establish. So that might take time again. So once they're gone, you don't know how long it's going to take for new beavers to come back. But take the beaver out, drop the pond, put the leveler in at the height you want it, and then wait for beaver to come back.
Right, because if there's habitat, they will come.
Yeah.
Right. We're just about at the end time. We are going to take a few more questions and go a little bit over, because there are quite a lot of good questions, but I want to have Tanya put up the closing poll before we have too many people leave. We really would love your feedback. Part of our mandate is to understand the impact of our work. And so if you could please fill out the poll, which you see on your screen, there's a couple questions there. It helps us report to our funders and understand if we're hitting the mark with the content that you heard today. So if you could fill that out, that would be really great before you leave. And please do stay for a few more minutes as well. We're going to try and cover off a few more questions as well. So I'll just let Tanya, we'll just let that run. And while that's running, there was another question about could we tell people what the sign-up list is that you mentioned, Kerry? And I think we can just include that in the follow-up email to registrants. So if people want to sign up for the Beaver list, basically the Beaver email list, then we'll have their names and can just send out, and they can sign up if they choose. So again, if you could fill out the closing poll, that would be great. It should be on your screen right now. While you're filling that out is a question of, did you learn new information? Basically, did you change your understanding as a result of the workshop? And have you tried any of these things? So yeah, please do fill out those questions. While people are doing that, Kerry, there's a question about beaver population management. So how or what would you recommend for managing populations to ensure that they are long-term in desired ponds without the risk of starvation, disease, or increased stress? How would you go about doing that? And I assume this is related to, not too many ending up there, because if there is no management, they might end up with too many, I think is the kind of implied impression I'm getting.
Oh, okay. Well, this is one thing, like we're not trappers. So I'm hoping to meet a trapper one day and spend some time with them and understand how they think about population management a little bit more. But I think without natural predators, there is always the risk of some natural, population to sort of explode, if you will. But then there's always some natural check usually that comes in, whether it is the disease, whether it is, might be a natural predator of some kind, bears or wolves or cougars are kind of the only natural predators that beaver have. And so it's an interesting question, because I don't think, and maybe actually Aaron, you may be able to speak to this from the ACA perspective, but I don't know that we know what the threshold is for keeping a healthy watershed with all the benefits that a beaver can provide, and what that population number is. So I don't know, Aaron, what's your experience with that?
I would say that it's a large landscape change system, right? Like, I mean, those kits are moving out, and if there's space, they'll move up or downstream within their habitat there, so they're not crossing over from their zones. I can't think of the proper word right now.
Territories.
Territories, thank you, exactly. And I think, I mean, it's just going to be a huge change in the complete landscape. I mean, if you just let them run free, they'll keep going up and downstream. And I don't know what the number, I think it's different for every system as to how much it can hold per beaver as to habitat. But I do also agree, I mean, there'd be disease or something that would come into play at some point as well, and keep that all in check. And depending on what an organization wants to do to manage a system, whether they want to just let it go naturally, it can change substantially. I mean, if it's a fish-bearing stream, well, eventually you'd have pools, but maybe spawning gets reduced over hundreds of years. I mean, it's a big timeline.
Yeah, and there are some approaches that again, I'm not sure have been tried or tested, but that I've heard about, would be things like trying to maintain the adult pair on the site, so that they are more in maintenance mode, as opposed to being a young, a young new beaver out there that's trying to build their own home. So if you have the chance to maintain a colony, instead of having them start over from fresh every 5 years or every however many years, that can help sort of balance that population out as well. So there may be somebody else again in the chat that has maybe I don't know, I'll say a better answer to that question, because it's one that I don't know a lot about.
Yeah, and actually there was a comment just now in the chat about how supplemental feeding might be part of that if you want to keep beavers, because often they're, although disease and predation might be part of the stories, they often eat themselves out of house and home. So if that's the case, in a small scale, again, thinking big scale and small time, they'll move to someplace else. But if that's not your desired approach, or you don't want that happening, then supplemental feeding is an option, including if you're doing things like pond levelers. So not just in a leave them alone kind of approach, beaver population, but maybe you're feeding. And that one example you showed of Pierre was a supplemental feeding situation for sure. But you have to be able to provide food if you're doing that, obviously, which may or may not be a viable option, obviously. We have quite a few more questions, so I want to try and squeeze in a few more, if you can answer as many as possible in the next couple minutes, and then we'll wrap up. So there's a comment about this person lives where beavers block spawning fish from the ocean upstream and further inland. And can you just talk about any issues with your experiences, not maybe with your interactions with Adrian, Kerry, or maybe you want to mention his lift system?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So this person is mentioned that they have beavers can block spawning from the ocean and getting upstream or further inland. And how might you, have you encountered this, or I guess how might you deal with it? If
Yeah.
that's the case?
No, yeah, good question. Yeah. Yeah, so I personally have not, but definitely I'll call him, you know, he's a partner, he's a good friend of ours in BC through Humane Solutions, who we've learned a lot of what we've done here, has done a lot of work in BC on that, and they have actually created like a type of like a fish lift system, where it's like a fish ladder that helps to get, even though most of them can get where they need to go, sometimes I guess they need a little help, but it's basically like a step system where the fish can get in, they can rest, they can go up a little higher, they can rest, go up a little higher, they can rest, and then they can get in and out of both ends, no problem. So I would encourage you to check out their website, which is just humane, I think it's humanesolutions.com.
I think that's correct. But I believe that's
yeah, and then also there's another system that I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's the same idea that I think maybe they're using in the eastern United States. So
great. So hopefully a quick question. Have you, this person's heard that electric fence could be used as a temporary barrier, and have used it, or I guess, can you comment on that?
Have not used it. I did hear somebody at a workshop tell me that they did that. They said, I don't want these beavers coming up onto my yard. So they set up an electric fence at about nose height on the beaver, and it did deter them. They, as far as I know, they didn't figure it out, and they maybe got that one little shock and then were like, okay, I'm not going to go up there anymore. So yeah, I've heard that too, but just that one example of anecdotal story that somebody said that they tried it and it worked for them.
I hadn't heard that landowner one, but I believe it was the Ellis Bird Farm a number of years ago tried it around one of their ponds, and they, I think, found it worked. But it was a challenge to get the height right, because when you have a lot of grass, beavers are pretty short, and I think that was one of the challenges. But also they found it helped keep them away from the few remaining trees they had by the buildings. So maybe last question, I don't think we're going to get to all the remaining because they keep coming in, but can you comment on this? So Diane commented that she noticed that many of the pipes and the fencing that you showed were in shallow water, and their understanding is that the pipe and fencing, if it isn't in at least 3 feet of water, the beavers are going to sense the flow and the noise and build along or around it. Can you talk about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most of the time, it's ideal that the water is 3 feet deep, and we have done, and I guess I necessarily didn't think about it in the examples that I showed, but we've done lots where the ponds have been over 6-7 feet deep. So that definitely does, having them in shallow water can be done. You just need to think about the things like maybe a multi-intake, for example, or things like that. So the 3 feet part is related to definitely the sense of suction, but also so that the beavers can move around in the wintertime. If it's in a pond that they're active in, it allows them to move under the ice. So I would say the ideal condition is the 3 foot mark, but they can be put in shallower situations.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You have to deal with the situation you have. So it's good if it can be a bit more flexible. There is one more question, actually, since we haven't talked about regulation. Can you just quickly add, this comment is about, has there been any pushback basically from government agencies regarding using some of these techniques, because they have found it difficult to put infrastructure essentially into lakes and rivers and streams because of regulation? So can you just make a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, it's a learning process, I think, of terms of where these types of devices fit into the current regulatory system. I wouldn't say that there's been pushback per se, but there's been conversations about, well, where does this fit? And that has been a challenge to navigate a little bit, and it is taking a lot of time to figure that out. But I know, to Aaron's experience, explaining the situation, explaining the device, providing an appropriate approval, an approval application, sort of made that process fairly easy for you. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And we have put in a few proposals, so I don't know if they're trying to recognize their name or not, but definitely just providing all the details, and also ensuring, I mean, again, if it's a fish bearing stream, realizing when the restricted work period is for that, and working outside of that would be a big suggestion.
Yeah. So I think, it's been there. We're trying to get more and more of these done, so that the regulators become more familiar with them, and we again begin to see where they fit in the stewardship side of the regulations, which is not what they were designed for. So definitely there's learning happening on both sides of that. And I think, yeah, the frustrating thing can be the time that it takes to go through these. And again, hopefully through all of these efforts, at some point there may be a streamlined process, more so, what is more of a notification, or more of a request for review type, or maybe a code of practice kind of a thing, maybe down the road. So yeah, so like I said, I wouldn't call it pushback, but it's just a more of a trying to figure out where it fits. And we have had at least 3 or 4 that I know of go through the approval process and be approved. And maybe one that I can think of that the requirements were too great for that particular group to deal with, and then that one didn't go through. So
thank you guys very much. That was really great info, and I think there's so many subtleties on all these topics, and it's each situation being a little different. And certainly we have people joining us today from across Canada and some from elsewhere outside of Canada too. So good to sort of see these different experiences and tour them virtually. So Kerry, did you want to do any final wrap up? I believe the poll has been closed. Anything you wanted to do on that front, or other comments?
no, I just there's a really great realm of questions there. That's fantastic. I would just have loved to be like on a bus somewhere, just going around the province talking about all this stuff. But I do want to thank all the people that have been involved in all these projects, because Cows and Fish has not done any of these by ourselves. We just happen to be the voice that is sharing the experiences with you today. So I want to thank everybody, from whether they're a consultant or a volunteer, or a member of a municipality, for trying this out, and or a regulator as well. And so I'm not sure if our contact information actually ended up showing up on the screen, but our website is just cowsandfish.org. And I did see somebody corrected us on the Humane Solutions, so thank you for that. It was humanesolutions.ca. Thanks for that. So yeah, so thanks for being here. And if you want to chat some more about it, give us a call.
Absolutely. Thanks.